So let's have a closer look at some of those front pages. We'll start with Wednesday's Guardian, Steve.
Yeah, Guardian goes with PM faces calls to aid poorest as winter fuel cut approved. It's worth noting this is the Guardian now not in favour of this cut to the winter fuel allowance. Carol Vorderman was on the news being all angry about it. I know they always say the time to do something unpopular is straight after an election. Yeah. But how unpopular do you need to go?
Yes.
Stop testing the theory. Dozens of Labour MPs refused to back. I take some of their argument that some of them made about the idea that if you vote against, you could lose the whip, and later on you might want to be part of a vote for an issue that's close to your heart. Rosie Duffield was making that point. But it's bad optics at the very least. Yes. Like, as soon as people die in the winter every year because it's cold. As soon as someone does it this year, front page, Killer, Starmer, they've taken the ownership of the deaths that will happen. Why would you make this the thing that you own?
Is it, do you think, beginning to look as if all these chickens were about to come home to roost, and this is why Rishi Sunak called a surprisingly early election? Because I don't know whether this has had to happen quite so urgently.
No, I think Rishi had plans to cut the civil service. He was going to slash, I think, 66,000 civil service jobs that were extra civil service jobs that were taken on during lockdown that we clearly don't need anymore. But Keir Starmer is keeping on. Why is he keeping those cushy jobs that are going to be a burden on the public purse for decades to come with pension liabilities and all that, or cutting net zero, or cutting, something like that? It's because Keir Starmer wants to have this huge, cumbersome, autocratic, communist government that does everything for people. So he'll do anything. He'll let old people starve in the street. He'll free people from prisons. He'll do whatever it takes to have this sort of big government.
I mean, it does appear that you're correct, but surely that sort of government would also want to make a socialist handout for fuel bills as well, no? Or is it because they regard pensioners as sitting in, properties worth millions, and it's like a class war?
Pensioners voted Tory for too many years, and now Labour hate them.
Triple lock has become a full Nelson.
In terms of socialism, you should presume that the poorer pensioners, the ones that are on that cusp you're about to hit, they could be convinced to vote for you. So it's a stupid move. Yeah. The optics are bad. Everything's bad about this. What would have been a nice move is, all of those people who did a tweet and they're on the way to prison because of that, release them straight away. They would have learnt their lesson. They would be like, oh no, I nearly went to prison for the tweet. And then you'd have freed up 500 spaces straight away.
You could at least ask all the people who've come out of jail to go and live with some pensioners. And just for the body heat, and maybe cuddle them a bit, and then also maybe power some kind of treadmill or something.
I think that's why these pensioners were doing tweets that are deemed grossly offensive, even though they're not offensive at all. I think they were doing it to get into jail and get a warm cell.
There are worse places to be for a 78-year-old man these days. And Labour have a toxic, underachieving criminal voter base, and they've also just released some prisoners.
I am an excellent driver, in case that was the inference. I'm a lifelong Labour voter now. Prisoners praise Starmer after early release. I mean, it's the one inmate says that it was a good idea introducing the scheme. On one hand, of course they would. Yeah. If someone releases you from prison, other than the people who are homeless, they're going to be in favour of this. They're getting home a bit early. If you're shocked by that, you don't understand people. But the way the Telegraph writes this, they are implying a few things. There's a bit of poop stirring going on here, isn't it? Like, what are you saying? I bet Labour only did this to get more voters, which is ridiculous. No one's going to do this to get more voters. The greatest distance between now and an election, hugely unpopular, other than for the handful of criminals who, let's be brutally honest, may have voted Labour anyway. And that shouldn't be that controversial to say.
I'll be brutally honest, I bet they don't vote.
Yeah.
And I know it's always a really a contentious issue that people argue about a lot. I think it was one of the ones that they tried to use on Kamala Harris as a gotcha. You're in favour of allowing convicts to vote. I mean, I just don't think they bother.
Yeah.
I think they're not that well organised. People have a misapprehension about criminals, that they're kind of evil geniuses. They're usually people who are just struggling.
Yeah. There's a guy who's a convicted drug dealer, said he'll be a lifelong Labour voter. Keep using the drugs, it won't be that long.
Yeah. Also, by 2029, he's probably going to be back in jail.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? They're recidivist anyway, 90% of the time. There's a lot of argument. There's, I think, supposed to be 4 main reasons that you lock people up. And there's retribution, rehabilitation, punishment, the sense of justice. and then keeping them off the streets. And of those 4, keeping them off the streets is the only aspect that really works. The other 3 are all just illusory.
And it's interesting that this is being done to make space for, like, there's an 81-year-old who, farted at a police horse or whatever. Yeah. There's an 11-year-old who shouted at a dog. There's
off with a hot dog, like a sausage roll.
Yeah, there's somebody else who up in like Sellafield worker who's sent to jail for 10 weeks for sharing these memes that were deemed grossly offensive by a judge. So they're not like actually criminal, they're just grossly offensive. And I looked at them, they didn't offend me. No. And I think if you're going to get offended by stuff, they basically said there's going to be more Asian men in this town. And, demographics-wise, that was just a fact. So I don't see why it's offensive for him to point it out in cartoon form.
Yeah, I do wonder whether some of the people who... Because this isn't going to solve anything overnight. Obviously, we all know this is going to get right up to the level again very soon. Do you see a second wave of criminals being released who are the ones who posted memes during the riots and so on? I think
there could be a lot of appeals, because I think a lot of people were denied legal representation, or not denied legal representation, but they were told, if you plead guilty, you'll be home. You're going to be held on remand anyway, so you might as well plead guilty, because by the time you get to the end of it, you'll be home anyway, and then they get a 3-year sentence. So I think a lot of people were sort of bluffing. You can see the difference with Ricky Jones, the Labour councillor, who was filmed, screaming for people's throats to be cut. He pleaded not guilty, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of sentence he gets, because that was far more vicious than a lot of these crimes.
It was inflammatory as well. It was physically in front of a crowd. Has that woman councillor who did post the really quite disobliging remark about hotels, has she been sentenced yet? The councillor's wife, sorry.
No, but her baby had actually died in a sort of a case of malpractice at the hands of a foreign doctor who I think had... I don't know if he'd misrepresented... no, he hadn't misrepresented his qualifications, but... I think that's quite...
a mitigating...
That's got to be quite a mitigating circumstance.
In her case, the bit that no one ever seems to mention, which is my favourite bit, in the tweet, she also says, burn the thing down for all I care, and the politicians too. It's what her husband does for a living.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the great way to slight your husband. Get rid of him for all I care. He does nothing around the house.
Frosty night in bed. On to the Express now. Leo, Labour are experiencing a day of shame. Did the Corbyn-Abbott home video leak again, I wonder?
So why aren't they being deported? Ministers face fury over day of shame prison crisis. This is Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood, who's facing growing calls to end the prison overcrowding crisis by deporting thousands of foreign criminals, blocking up space in the jails, still related to the last story. So she revealed that some of the 1,700 convicts being released by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party will end up in taxpayer-funded hotels because they will be homeless. And experts have warned it's almost a dead certainty that some of them will commit more offences. I mean, it is a dead certainty. I'd be amazed if they hadn't committed... They've committed offences already.
48 hours. One of those empty Prosecco bottles.
And Richard Tice, the Reform UK's deputy leader, has urged ministers to save billions and deport 10,000 foreign crooks who are locked up in British jails. And why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we clearing space by deporting criminals? Don't even deport them to the right country. Just make it a lucky dip thing. Just pick a random place on Google Earth.
Or whatever flight has got seats vacant.
The pushback, and this is not an argument I believe, but the pushback is these could be going back to countries where we do not have an agreement that says these people would be in prison there. So it would be, you've committed a crime over here and we'll send you back to be free. Well, if you're the victim of that crime, you might be, wait a minute, I want them to serve 25 years for it. But I would still think you're better off having a situation where you don't release other prisoners.
As long as they can't come back straight back over again.
For that period of time.
I mean, to all intents and purposes, abroad is a prison, isn't it? By comparison with
used to be, didn't it? One very special place. We could open that up again.
Daily Mail, Leo. Primary school children are getting caught with drugs growing up in Scotland. That would have been part of a balanced packed lunch.
We didn't get a packed lunch. Crack to school. Almost 130 children a day are sent home from class after being caught with drugs, alcohol or cigarettes. Shock figures show. I thought it was a new Oasis song, but no, this is a headline. With the youngest kid caught with drugs, alcohol or cigarettes, aged just 5. I mean, this is terrible. 130 kids a day don't know how to not get caught. We really need to be teaching kids how to hide it.
I want to know what the 5-year-old had, don't you? Tixie licks, do you think?
Well,
Calpol.
It can't have been deliberate. I mean, what 5-year-old deliberately takes drugs? He must have picked up, one of his dad's.
Probably one of the parents tucked a packet of fags in his back pocket or something just to try and walk them into the ground and forgot to get them out again.
Yeah.
This is no punishment, is it? The idea that you get a kid who's got some drugs and stuff and you send them home and they're going to be thinking, oh no, I was this close to learning what cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta equals, and now I guess I'll just go home with my drugs. What will I do all day?
I would just take the drugs, cigarettes or booze, put them in the staff common room.
That's how nightclubs used to work.